still. Now let's get more reaction to James Cleverly's speech on migration. I'm now joined by GBNews' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, more tough talking. Always a pleasure to see you, by the way. More tough talking from James Cleverly, the biggest ever reduction in net migration. Enough is enough, he's crying. The point is, how much is enough? Because he's cutting 300,000 off, but if you do the maths as Chopper did in real time, it's still a net figure of 372,000 or 445,000, depending on how you do the books. So that's still a huge amount. Will this be enough to satisfy Conservative voters, Nigel?
Well, possibly not, on the basis that the only reason you're cutting a record amount of legal migrants coming here is because you have a record amount of legal migrants coming here. So, no, I think people want to see immigration much lower. But however, we've got to take into account the need for the economy. So I rather agreed with the former First Secretary Damien Green in response to James Cleverly, where he said that out of the 5-point plan, he thought 4.5 points of them were pretty good. I think that's right. The 20% cut in bosses being able to employ cheap foreign labour goes. That's a long-standing Labour policy that James Cleverly's adopted. That's good. But the problem, obviously, for social and healthcare workers is that they can't bring dependents. Now, that means we've got to fill the vacancies with single people.
I guess, Nigel, though, one thing it will do, and we're getting to that point now where it's not enough for the Labour Party, Yvette Cooper, Sir Keir Starmer to keep saying, well, the Tories have completely failed on this, which may be true, but we need to see some detail from the Labour Party. What will they plan to do in return? And OK, you can say that Cleverly's nicked an idea from Labour, but, that hasn't stopped the Labour Party doing that in the past. And the interesting thing will be, Nigel, if the Labour Party are forced to come out and say that they wouldn't do any of this, because the abuse of dependents in particular, and, is something that people really, really are concerned about, and particularly in the student visas. So we now need to see what Labour plan to do.
Yes, and I think that probably Labour will largely follow these plans as they stand, as I said, because some of it is Labour policy anyway. I think the most significant point is that you can't now hire cheap foreign labour. Now, we will all pay a cost for that. There'll be a knock-on effect on higher prices. However, it is the one way of reducing the number of people coming here because employers won't be encouraging them. And that will also mean that British workers can get British jobs.
Didn't that used to be a key part of what the Labour Party stood for? The idea that we should pay a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, that's a good thing, isn't it? And when did we get addicted on this doom cycle of foreign, cheap, imported labour? Surely the Labour Party can also agree that cycle needs to end.
Well, they do. That's exactly what they're saying. And you're right, that the British jobs for British workers was a slogan that Gordon Brown came up with. And the point that the Labour Party is making, and I think rightly, is that you should get equal pay for an equal day's work. So it doesn't matter whether you're from overseas or you're a British worker. But the great bonus of that is it will mean that employers are more likely to hire British workers because they can get them at the same rate.
Well, that sounds like a good thing. Another topic in the news today, Nigel, is the BBC licence fee. Here we go again. It's back in the telescope sights of the government, this time rattling their sabre about blocking a 9% pay rise, licence fee rise, on that. What's your take on that? Should the government be getting involved in this, or is the licence fee actually fair for what you get?
Well, I mean, with the licence fee at the moment is 43p a day, which is quite cheap for all the various services the BBC provide: TV, radio, both national and local, online news, the World Service. If the BBC got a full £15 increase, which is what they want, that would only go up 47p. So it's not a huge amount of money. What I do think that Rishi Sunak is dodging at the moment is the licence fee itself is just outdated. What you need is a new system of funding the BBC, and probably the best way of doing that is some kind of household levy.
And so how would that work? I mean, that's what we already have. The BBC licence fee is a de facto household levy. You don't get a choice if you pay it or not. In fact, if you don't want to pay it, you can end up in jail or prosecuted. I've been inundated with stories of that today when I put it out on social media. So how would this household levy work, Nigel?
For starters, it would become an opt-out system rather than opt-in, which makes it easier to collect and enforce. It would work in a similar way to the way that we pay council tax. So what would happen is that you would pay different levels of license fee depending on the value of your house. So obviously, the bigger the house, the more likely you are to have more than one television. And those people would end up paying more. Now, if you actually added it to council tax and you collected it that way, what it would mean is that people would automatically be opted in, and anybody who didn't want to watch the BBC could then opt out and not pay the fee. And of course, you could enforce that much more easily because you could check that those people are opting out legitimately.
But surely everybody would just opt out.
Well, I mean, if they did opt out, then they can't watch the BBC. There's a situation we've got at the moment that the BBC have lost 400,000 licence payers a year, and that's because people are using different services and not having anything to do with the BBC. So it would be your choice. You could then decide, do you want to watch the BBC or don't you?
OK, Nigel Nelson, always a pleasure to talk to you. GB News' senior political commentator, thank you very much. I think if there was an opt-out clause, simply everybody in Britain with half a brain would opt out.